For over 1,000 years, one civilization pretty much dominated the Western world. But how did the Roman Empire rise so high, and what really, truly caused it to fall? We're about to explore its epic journey from republic to ruin, and even beyond. You know, this quote from the historian Will Durant is going to be our guide today. Was Rome really conquered by outside forces, or did it just kind of crumble from the inside out? Keep that question right in the front of your mind as we explore what really happened.
Okay, so first up, how did this massive change even happen? How did Rome go from a republic to this enormous empire?
Well, the Republic, with its senators and its elections, completely gave way to an autocracy that's just ruled by one person with absolute power. This all happened after decades of really brutal civil war when Julius Caesar's heir, a guy named Octavian, came out on top. He took the name Augustus, and as Rome's very first emperor, he established the Julio-Claudian dynasty. And let me tell you, this changed Roman politics forever.
Augustus's rule kicked off 2 whole centuries of relative peace and stability. We call it the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. I mean, for the first time, this huge empire wasn't just consumed by fighting itself. Trade was booming, new roads connected pretty much the entire known world, cities grew like crazy, and Roman culture was at its absolute peak.
This timeline really puts the lifespan of the Western Empire into perspective. It starts with that golden age, the Pax Romana, way back in 27 BCE. But look, by 180 CE, that era is over, and that begins this long, slow decline that ends with the final collapse almost 300 years later in 476 CE. So, with all this power and all this culture, how did the Romans actually express it? Let's talk about their art and architecture. The Romans were incredible at realistic sculptures and these stunningly detailed mosaics. They just loved bright colors, and they'd often show powerful emperors, scenes from mythology, and, later on, Christian symbols. You gotta understand, this art wasn't just for decoration. It was a tool. It was a way to broadcast power, faith, and what it meant to be Roman all across the empire. And their engineering, wow, it was a total game changer. By mastering the column, the arch, and the dome, they could build on a scale nobody had ever seen before. We're talking about massive aqueducts carrying water for miles to iconic buildings like the Colosseum. They really set the standard for Western architecture for centuries to come.
All right, but what about what was going on inside their heads? What ideas and religions were shaping the Roman mind during this time?
Let's start with a quote from Marcus Aurelius. This guy wasn't just an emperor, he was a brilliant philosopher, and his focus on our inner life, it perfectly captures this super popular Roman philosophy, Stoicism. So, Stoicism basically argued that happiness isn't about how much money you have or your status. It's all about your internal response to the world. It was all about duty, self-control, and just being a good person. You can see how, in a vast, unpredictable empire, this philosophy of inner strength and responsibility would have a huge appeal, from soldiers to leaders to regular citizens. At the same time, another belief system was spreading out of Judea. Christianity offered this really powerful message of salvation and community, and it grew incredibly fast, carried by missionaries like Paul. But its belief in one God clashed directly with the Roman gods and the idea of worshiping the emperor. This led to it being outlawed, and its followers were often violently persecuted. So if everything was so great, why did this incredibly powerful empire start to crumble? What went wrong? Well, there was no single cause. It was really a cascade of failures. Internally, you had corrupt leaders and constant civil wars, creating all this instability. Territorially, the empire was just too big. It was a nightmare to defend. And to pay for it all, crippling taxes and runaway inflation that just crushed the economy. This was that internal decay that Will Durant was talking about.
Seeing this crisis unfold, some emperors tried some really desperate measures. Diocletian actually split the massive empire in two, an east and a west, just to make it governable. A little later, Constantine reunified it, but he made 2 world-changing moves. He legalized Christianity, and then he moved the capital away from Rome to a new eastern city, Constantinople. That shifted the empire's entire center of gravity. But even with all those efforts, the western half of the empire was about to face its end. How did it happen? The final blows came from the outside, but they struck an empire that was already incredibly weak.
The arrival of the Huns from Asia, led by the famous Attila, just unleashed chaos. They pushed wave after wave of Germanic tribes over the Roman borders. And these tribes, who were looking for safety in land, eventually turned on the empire, invading and sacking the city of Rome itself, over and over again.
The pressure was just too much. In the year 476, the very last Roman emperor in the West was kicked off the throne. And that's the year that historians mark as the symbolic end of a 1,000-year-old empire. But hold on, the fall of the West wasn't the end of the whole story. Remember that other half, the Eastern Empire?
So while the West was falling into chaos, the East was actually flourishing. It became what we now call the Byzantine Empire. Its capital was Constantinople. It was Greek-speaking, its economy was based on trade, and its religion was distinct. It was still Roman at its core, but it was evolving into a whole new kind of civilization.
The Byzantine Golden Age really peaked under Emperor Justinian and Empress Theodora, and these two were amazing. They didn't just reconquer old territories and build incredible monuments like the Hagia Sophia, they preserved Rome's greatest intellectual legacy. They compiled all of Roman law into a single text called Justinian's Code, a work that became the foundation for many legal systems we still see in Europe today.
And this is just an astonishing fact to think about. The legacy of Rome, carried on by the Byzantine Empire, lasted for another 1,000 years after the fall of the West, a full millennium. It's incredible. Which, of course, leaves us with a final, really fascinating question. If Roman law, culture, and power survived for another 1,000 years in the East, did Rome ever truly fall? It challenges that simple story we learn about 476, and it reminds us that history is often a story of transformation, not just clean endings.